Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with pan-roasted 5-spice pork loin. That's right, they used to say pork was the other white meat, which really is accurate, especially the loin, which I've always considered sort of the boneless, skinless chicken breast of the pork world. And that's exactly why I'm so excited to show you this technique. Because by using a fairly simple butchery trick, as well as a super easy Asian-inspired marinade, we're going to produce something significantly more exciting than your typical pork loin roast. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started with the star of the show, our pork loin. And what you see here is about a 2-pound piece, which usually comes pretty much fully trimmed. But sometimes like this one, they have a little bit of that membrane left on top. So all we need to do is take a thin, sharp knife and slide that in between the silver skin and the meat. And as you can see, that allows us to remove that without losing much, if any, meat. And sure, this step is technically optional. Depending on how you serve this pork, that little bit of silver skin might not cause a problem. So you decide. You are the Richard Simmons of your trimmings. But generally, as a rule, I do like to remove it. So we'll go ahead and we'll clean that up. And then what we're going to do is turn this on its side and take a larger but still sharp knife and simply split that as even as we can lengthwise. And instead of having one very thick piece of pork, we're going to basically end up with 2 nice thick pork steaks. But wait, there's more. As soon as we have our loin split in 2 pieces, we're going to take our knife and make some shallow slashes in the flesh, about 1/8 of an inch deep, about 1 inch apart, going one direction, and then we'll turn and go the other for your classic diamond pattern. And of course, we'll do that to both pieces, both sides. And what we just accomplished here, besides turning one large piece of meat into 2 smaller, easier to cook pieces of meat, we've also, by scoring it like this, have created tons of surface area, which is really going to help our marinade get into this meat quicker and more effectively. Plus, not to mention, it's also going to look really cool when it cooks. But anyway, we'll go ahead and prep our pork as shown, at which point we can put together our very simple 5-spice marinade. So into a mixing bowl, let's go ahead and add some seasoned rice vinegar, as well as some finely minced garlic. We're also going to have to add some Asian fish sauce, which, by the way, may be the second most important ingredient here. We also want to add a splash of soy sauce, as well as a nice generous application of hot sauce. I'm using sriracha. And then we will season this up with some salt, as well as its good friend and wingman, freshly ground black pepper. And then last but certainly not least, a spoon of Chinese 5-spice powder, which, by the way, may or may not include 5 spices. So it usually has things like ground cloves and ginger and aniseed and fennel and stuff like that, but that can vary depending on brand. But as always, I'll tell you exactly what I used on the blog post. And then to finish this off, all we need to do is take a whisk and give it a thorough mixing. And believe it or not, that's it. I told you it was simple. And then what we're going to do next is place our split and scored pork in the bottom of some kind of dish. And we will pour in our freshly mixed marinade and take a fork and turn those pieces over several times until they're very nicely coated. And at this point, we have some options as far as marination goes. What I'm going to do is just leave mine right on the counter out at room temperature for 30 minutes, tossing occasionally. And because of the way we split and scored that meat, that's going to be all we need. So this is my preferred method, but you can also throw this in a zip-top bag and toss it in the fridge for a few hours for the same effect. And I'll talk more about the marination time on Food Wishes. But like I said, I just leave mine on the counter for about a half hour, at which point it's ready to cook. And as the name would indicate, we're going to go ahead and pan roast this. So what I have here is a heavy-duty cast iron skillet set over medium-high heat, into which I put a little bit of vegetable oil. And all we're going to do is cook this for approximately 4 to 5 minutes per side, or until the internal temp hits about 145. So thanks to that butchery trick I keep bragging about, the cooking time here is going to be relatively quick. All right, start to finish, this only took me 10 minutes. So I gave my first side about 4 or 5 minutes, and I flipped it over, and gave the other side about the same. And while I do hope you use a thermometer to check your work, we can sort of use the same poke test we use for chicken breast, where if it feels mushy, it's rare, but when it kind of firms up and springs back, that generally means you're just about perfect. And then besides cooking it on both sides until it's done to your liking, when I feel mine is just about there, I do like to brush both sides with the marinade. And in case you're wondering, because I know this does confuse a lot of people, it's always okay to use a marinade to touch raw meat as long as it's cooked. So because we're brushing it on this hot meat in the pan and we're flipping it around a few times, there's no danger of any foodborne illness. On the other hand, if you don't cook the marinade through and just kind of spoon it over the finished meat, you may have some problems. And by problems, I mean lawsuits. So if you are going to glaze with the marinade, make sure it gets heated through, okay? But anyway, to recap, we're going to cook that meat to our liking, quite possibly glazing with the marinade near the end. And once we feel and or test that our meat is perfect, we'll remove that to a plate to rest. And I didn't show it, but of course you can splash some water into that pan and garnish that pork with some of those pan drippings, as we so often do. But anyway, like I said, we'll let that meat rest. I'd say at least 5 minutes, so you don't lose all those juices when you slice it. And then after that brief but important respite, we will go ahead and slice that up. And thanks to the way this was trimmed and scored, as well as that very basic but magical marinade, you should be looking at some very juicy, incredibly flavorful meat. But of course, I'm not going to just trust my eyes. They have lied to me many times before, so I intentionally screwed up a slice so I could taste it. And this really is amazing. Just very moist and tender with those beautiful sweet aromatics from the Chinese 5-spice in the background. In fact, you can tell when I sneak a second taste during the slicing segment. It's really good. And speaking of slicing, you may be thinking to yourself, hey, you're cutting that kind of thin. What are you making, some kind of mind-blowing sandwich? Well, yes. Yes, I am. And I'm showing you this picture for 2 reasons. First of all, a roasted pork banh mi, maybe the greatest sandwich ever invented in the history of the world. And secondly, that is going to be the next video. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, so we can finish this off with the official final taste, I sliced 7 or 8 thicker, more perfectly cut pieces and laid that over some steamed rice next to a little bit of spicy jalapeno slaw, as well as a little bit of the aforementioned pan drippings, and even presented as simply as this, still tremendously delicious. Like I said, so flavorful, and as you can hopefully see, just incredibly moist and tender. And considering how simple this was to put together, I thought the results were stellar. In fact, the only thing I wasn't thrilled with here was my stupid fake plastic reed placemat, which is why the plate was moving all over while I tried to eat this. Let that be a lesson to you kids. Never try to imitate nature. The universe hates that. So while I will be throwing away this ridiculously ineffective placemat, this pan-roasted 5-spice pork loin recipe is definitely a keeper. So like I said, stay tuned for the upcoming banh mi episode. And in the meantime, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.